The forbidden assignment. The transport pod hummed to a stop outside the human embassy on Kepler Station, and Zara felt her secondary hearts skip in rhythm with her primary one. Through the small viewport, she could see the clean lines of the diplomatic complex so different from the angular, efficient architecture of her homeworld. Her pale blue fingers trembled as she smoothed down her service uniform, the gray fabric feeling rougher than usual against her naturally cool skin. Remember the protocols, she whispered to herself in the clicking musical language of the Catherians. Maintain emotional distance, perform duties with precision, report any signs of contamination immediately. The pod door slid open with a soft hiss, and Ambassador Patricia Torres appeared at the entrance. The human woman's face bore what Zara had learned was called a smile, though her cultural training screamed warnings about the dangerous warmth behind such expressions. "Zara, welcome to the embassy," Torres said, her voice carrying that peculiar, human quality that seemed to wrap around listeners like a warm blanket. "I hope your journey from the Catherian sector wasn't too difficult." Zara straightened her spine and placed her four-fingered hands behind her back in the traditional posture of respectful service. "The journey was acceptable, Ambassador. I am prepared to begin my assigned duties immediately." She watched Torres's smile falter slightly at her formal tone, but the human woman simply nodded and gestured toward the embassy entrance. "Of course. Let me introduce you to Diplomat Chen. He'll be your primary assignment." As they walked through the corridors, Zara kept her large silver eyes focused downward, studying the strange patterns in the flooring. Everything here seemed designed for comfort rather than mere function. Soft lighting instead of harsh efficiency beams, curved corners instead of sharp angles, and everywhere the subtle sense that indicated humans lived and worked in these spaces rather than simply existing. "Zara," Torres said gently, causing the Catherian to look up despite herself. "I want you to know that we're grateful for this cultural exchange program. Your people's perspective will be invaluable to our diplomatic efforts." Perspective. As if her opinion mattered. As if she were something more than a biological tool assigned to perform specific functions. The concept was so alien that Zara felt a flutter of something dangerous in her chest, something her conditioning identified as curiosity. They stopped before a door marked with symbols in both human script and Catherian glyphs. Torres pressed her palm to a scanner, and the door slid open to reveal a spacious office bathed in warm, natural light. "Marcus," Torres called, "I'd like you to meet Zara." The human who rose from behind the desk was not what Zara had expected. Her briefings had prepared her for the typical human diplomat. Tall, imposing, with the cold efficiency that supposedly masked their species' emotional instability. Instead, Marcus Chen was of average height with kind brown eyes and an open expression that immediately put her on guard. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it while working, and when he smiled at her, the expression reached his eyes in a way that made something flutter deep in her chest. "Hello, Zara," he said, his voice pitched low and careful. "I'm Marcus. I want you to know how honored I am to have you working with me, and I hope we can make this arrangement comfortable for both of us." Comfortable. The word hung in the air between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she dared cross. On Catheria, comfort was a luxury reserved for the upper castes. Service caste individuals like herself were expected to function efficiently, not to experience comfort. "I am here to serve," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus exchanged a glance with Torres that Zara couldn't interpret, then moved to a desk near the window. Instead of handing her a data tablet directly, he placed it on the surface, where she could retrieve it without physical contact. "I've prepared a list of daily tasks," he explained, "but please don't hesitate to ask if you need clarification on anything. I want you to feel—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I want you to feel welcome here. Welcome." Another concept that didn't translate properly into her understanding of the universe. Catherians were assigned, deployed, and utilized. They were not welcomed. After Torres left, Zara found herself alone with Marcus for the first time. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the uncomfortable tension she had expected. Instead, there was something almost peaceful about sharing space with this human. She could hear him working at his desk, the soft tapping of his fingers on his terminal, the occasional rustle of papers. Normal sounds. Living sounds. "Zara," he said after a while, and she turned from where she had been organizing files. "Could I ask you something?" Every instinct screamed danger. Questions from superiors were usually tests, opportunities to identify weakness or disloyalty. But something in his tone made her nod. "What's your homeworld like?" he asked simply. The question was so unexpected that she found herself answering before her conditioning could stop her. "Cold," she said. "Everything is very efficient, clean, ordered." Marcus leaned back in his chair, giving her his complete attention in a way that made her skin flush with heat. "Do you miss it?" Miss it. The concept was so foreign that she had to process it for several seconds. I do not understand the question." "Do you feel sad being away from home? Do you wish you were back there instead of here?" Sad. Wish. These were emotional concepts that her people had been conditioned to suppress, yet Marcus spoke of them as if they were natural, normal parts of existence. "My assignment is here," she said carefully. "My preferences are irrelevant." Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a shadow of what she would later learn was sadness crossing his features. "Everyone's preferences matter, Zara. Everyone deserves to have their feelings acknowledged." The words hit her like a physical blow. Feelings acknowledged. Not suppressed, not reported, not corrected. Acknowledged. As if emotions were something valuable rather than dangerous. That evening, alone in her assigned quarters, Zara sat on the edge of her narrow sleeping platform and stared at her hands. The accommodation was simple but comfortable, with soft lighting and even a small viewport showing the stars. Her briefings had warned her about human spaces, how they were designed to evoke emotional responses, to make inhabitants feel safe, and content. She had been told this was a form of psychological manipulation, a way to lower the guard of other species. But sitting there, surrounded by gentle warmth instead of harsh efficiency, Zara began to wonder if perhaps the humans weren't trying to manipulate anyone. Perhaps they simply believed that all beings deserved to feel safe and content. The thought terrified her more than any threat of punishment ever had. The next morning brought her first real test. While preparing Marcus's morning beverage, a bitter human drink called coffee, Zara's nervousness caused her to miscalculate the temperature. The ceramic mug was too hot, and as she set it down, it slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, sending hot liquid splashing across the tiles. For a moment, she simply stared at the mess, her entire body going rigid with terror. Now, Cytherea, such clumsiness would result in immediate punishment, possibly reassignment to an even lower position. She dropped to her knees, frantically trying to gather the ceramic pieces with her bare hands. "Zara, stop!" Marcus's voice came from behind her, gentle but urgent. "You'll cut yourself." She looked up to find him approaching with a cleaning cloth and what appeared to be protective gloves. His face showed no anger, no disgust, no preparation to deliver punishment. Instead, he looked concerned. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of her shame. "I will accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate. Please don't send me back to the service pool." Marcus knelt beside her on the floor, his movements slow and careful. "Zara, look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to meet his. What she saw there made her breath catch in her throat. Not anger, not disappointment, but something warm and gentle that she had no name for. "You're not going to be punished," he said softly. "You're not going to be sent away. Accidents happen, they're part of life. What matters is that you're not hurt." He cared more about her well-being than his possessions. The realization hit her like a shockwave, fundamentally altering something deep in her understanding of the universe. This human, this supposed representative of an emotionally unstable and dangerous species, was showing her more consideration than she had ever received from her own kind. "I don't understand," she managed. "What don't you understand? Why you're being kind to me?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his brown eyes studying her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow felt like coming home. "Because that's what you deserve, Zara. You deserve kindness. You deserve to be treated with respect and care." That night, lying in her bed with her heart's beating in complex rhythms, Zara pressed her hands to her chest and felt something fundamental shifting inside her. Marcus's words echoed in her mind, challenging everything she had been taught about her place in the universe, about the nature of her species and his. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to wonder what it might feel like to be touched with the same gentleness Marcus had shown to a broken piece of ceramic. As if she were something precious rather than something useful. The thought should have horrified her. Instead, it filled her with a longing so intense it was almost painful. Her cultural conditioning whispered warnings about contamination, about the dangerous human ability to make other species feel valued and important. But as she closed her eyes and drifted toward sleep, Zara realized she was no longer sure she cared about avoiding contamination. If feeling valued was a symptom of human influence, then perhaps being contaminated wasn't the worst thing that could happen to a person. Perhaps, she thought as consciousness faded, it was the best. In the days that followed, Zara found herself changing in ways both subtle and profound. The rigid posture she had maintained since childhood began to relax. Her responses to Marcus's questions grew longer, more detailed, less filtered through layers of conditioning. She began to notice things, the way sunlight felt warm on her skin instead of simply functional, the way certain foods had flavors beyond mere nutritional value, the way Marcus's laughter created a resonance in her chest that felt like joy. Joy. Another forbidden emotion that she was discovering had been there all along, buried beneath years of suppression. The transformation was happening exactly as her people had warned, exactly as they had feared. Human emotional contamination was real, and it was changing her at the most fundamental level. The terrifying part was that she was beginning to like it. The transformation. 3 weeks into her assignment, Zara stood before the mirror in her quarters and barely recognized the being staring back at her. Her silver eyes held a warmth that hadn't been there before. Her pale blue skin seemed to glow with health, rather than the pale efficiency she had maintained all her life. Most disturbing of all, her mouth kept curving upward in what she was learning to identify as a smile. She was contaminated, thoroughly, completely and undeniably contaminated with human emotional patterns. The realization should have sent her running to the Cytherian medical bay for immediate treatment. Instead, she found herself humming as she prepared for another day of work with Marcus, a melodic sound that would have horrified her superiors but felt as natural as breathing. "Good morning, Zara," Marcus said as she entered his office, and the warmth in his voice sent that familiar flutter through her chest. Over the past weeks, their interactions had evolved from formal exchanges to something resembling actual conversation. Marcus had developed a habit of asking her opinion on diplomatic matters, treating her insights as valuable rather than irrelevant. "Good morning, Marcus," she replied, no longer able to maintain the rigid formality her training demanded. "I reviewed the trade proposals from the Altarian delegation. Their terms seem reasonable, but I noticed something in their cultural context that might be important." Marcus set down his coffee and gave her his complete attention, that focused look that made her feel like the most important person in the galaxy. "What did you notice?" "Altarians value long-term stability over short-term gains. The profit margins they're proposing seem low by human standards, but they're offering something more valuable to their mindset. A partnership that could last centuries." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's brilliant, Zara. I would never have caught that nuance. Your perspective is invaluable." Invaluable. The word wrapped around her like a warm embrace. Marcus didn't just appreciate her work. He genuinely valued her thoughts, her insights, her unique way of understanding the galaxy. The concept was so foreign to her upbringing that it still took her breath away. "There's something else," she continued, surprised by her own boldness. I've been thinking about the Cytherian trade restrictions, my people's reluctance to engage in emotional commerce. Emotional commerce? Zara moved closer to his desk, her natural caution warring with an unusual desire to share her thoughts. My species fears what you call emotional intelligence. We view it as a form of contamination that weakens our efficiency. But working here, seeing how humans interact with each other and with other species, I'm beginning to think we might be wrong. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. How so? Your emotional connections make you stronger, not weaker. When you care about someone, you work harder to protect them. When you feel joy, you're more creative. When you experience empathy, you make better decisions because you understand the impact on others. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. I think my people aren't afraid of weakness. They're afraid of power. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something that seemed to combine admiration, concern, and something deeper that made her skin flush with heat. Zara, he said finally, what you just said, it's remarkable. But I'm worried about you. What happens if your superiors discover you've been thinking these thoughts? The question hit her like a cold wave. She had been so absorbed in her personal transformation that she hadn't fully considered the consequences. If Veltar, her Cytherian overseer, discovered her contamination, she would be recalled immediately for intensive reconditioning. The process was said to be painful, erasing not just unauthorized thoughts but sometimes entire sections of memory. I don't know, she admitted, her voice small. Marcus stood up and moved around his desk, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Zara, I need you to understand something. What you're experiencing isn't contamination. It's growth. It's becoming who you were always meant to be. But my people, your people are wrong, Marcus said gently but firmly. Fear makes them wrong. They're so afraid of losing control that they're willing to sacrifice the best parts of themselves to maintain it. His words resonated through her chest like a bell, awakening something that had been sleeping deep in her consciousness. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that her entire culture, everything she had been taught about strength and efficiency and proper behavior, might be built on a foundation of fear rather than wisdom. What if you're right? She whispered. What if I am? Then I've been living a lie my entire life. Then my people have been living a lie for generations. Marcus's hand moved slowly toward her face, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers gently touched her cheek and the contact sent electricity through her entire nervous system. Then maybe it's time to start living the truth, he said softly. The moment was interrupted by the sharp sound of her personal communicator activating. Veltar's harsh voice filled the room, speaking in rapid Cytherian. Service Unit Zara, report to monitoring station immediately. Behavioral assessment required. Zara's blood turned to ice. Behavioral assessment meant they had detected signs of contamination. Somehow, despite her careful attempts to maintain proper protocols during official communications, her superiors had noticed changes in her patterns. What did he say? Marcus asked, his face creased with concern. They want to see me, Zara replied, her voice barely audible. They know. Marcus's jaw tightened. What will they do? Reconditioning. They'll remove the contamination, erase the unauthorized thoughts and emotions. I'll be returned to proper functioning. And if you refuse? Zara looked at him with eyes that held centuries of conditioning. Refusal isn't an option. I'm service caste. I exist to serve. My personal preferences are irrelevant. But even as she spoke the words, she realized they no longer felt true. Working with Marcus, experiencing kindness and respect and genuine care had awakened something in her that couldn't be easily erased. She had preferences now. She had desires. She had for the first time in her life a sense of her own worth that existed independent of her utility to others. Zara, Marcus said urgently, you don't have to go. I don't understand. You could, Request asylum. Human space offers protection for beings fleeing persecution. You could stay here, work with us, be free to become whoever you want to be. Asylum. Freedom. The concepts were so vast, so terrifying and wonderful, that she felt dizzy contemplating them. To never again suppress her emotions. To never again pretend that her thoughts and feelings were irrelevant. To continue growing and learning and experiencing the full spectrum of what it meant to be alive. But I would never see my home again, she said. Is that home worth preserving if it requires you to sacrifice your soul? The question hung in the air between them like a choice between two different futures. In one, she returned to Cytheria, underwent reconditioning and resumed her previous existence as an efficient, emotionless tool. In the other, she stayed with Marcus and continued her journey of becoming something new, something that was uniquely herself. I'm scared, she admitted. I know, but you're also brave. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. Brave. No one had ever called her brave before. The word settled into her chest like a seed, taking root and beginning to grow. If I stay, she said slowly, what happens to us? Marcus's eyes searched her face, and she saw in them the same longing she felt in her own chest. I don't know. We'll figure it out together. Together. The word held promise and possibility, and the chance to build something neither of them had experienced before. Zara closed her eyes and made her choice. When she opened them again, she was looking at Marcus with a clarity she had never experienced before. I want to stay. His smile was radiant, transforming his entire face and filling her with warmth that seemed to emanate from every cell in her body. Are you sure? I'm sure. For the first time in my life, I'm completely sure of something. Marcus reached for his communicator. I'll contact Ambassador Torres. We'll need to file the asylum request immediately. As he spoke rapidly into the device explaining the situation to his superior, Zara felt something extraordinary happening inside her chest. The fear that had governed her entire existence was being replaced by something new, something that made her stand straighter and breathe deeper. Hope. When Marcus finished his call, he turned back to her with an expression that made her heart race. Torres says the paperwork will take a few hours to process. We'll need to keep you in human territory until it's complete. And then you'll be free to make your own choices about your life. Free. The word tasted like starlight on her tongue. Marcus, she said, her voice stronger than she had ever heard it. I want you to know something. My people were right about human contamination. You did change me. You made me feel things I was never supposed to feel, think thoughts I was never supposed to think. His face fell slightly. Zara, I never meant to. You made me feel valuable, she continued, stepping closer to him. You made me feel intelligent and capable and worthy of kindness. You contaminated me with the belief that I deserved to be treated with respect and care. She reached up and placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm. And I'm grateful for every moment of it. Marcus's arms came around her, pulling her against him in an embrace that felt like coming home. You were always valuable, Zara. I just helped you see it. As she stood there in his arms, feeling safe and cherished and completely herself for the first time in her life, Zara understood what her people had really been afraid of. It wasn't contamination. It was liberation. The human capacity for emotional connection, for seeing value in others, for treating beings with dignity and respect regardless of their social status. This wasn't a weakness to be feared. It was a strength so profound that it could transform entire civilizations, and she was living proof of its power. So what happens now? She asked, looking up into Marcus's eyes. Now, he said, his voice warm with possibility. We write our own story. Outside the embassy windows, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and Zara felt herself becoming part of something larger than duty or service or cultural conditioning. She was becoming part of a universe where emotions were strengths, where kindness was a superpower, and where a former service caste individual could stand as an equal beside a human diplomat and dream of building something beautiful together. Her people had warned her about human contamination. They had been right to fear it. But they had been wrong about what it would cost her. It hadn't cost her anything. It had given her everything. The contamination was complete, and she had never been more herself.